All right, thanks for coming, y'all. I appreciate each and every one of y'all being here. It means a lot to me. You could be anywhere else in Austin right now, and you're here. So I'm just gonna do a brief overview of what I'm really doing tonight, which is going over the vibrational history of the sciences that really led to the creation and understanding of what ended up being biogeometry, but also because I'm a student of biogeometry, I'm still in the process of actually becoming a practitioner. So I've been in this long, beautiful process of 2 or 3 years now, really going through each of the classes, and they've really given me so much value to my life. It's unbelievable, and that's part of why I'm so dedicated to sharing this magic. But with that being said, I'm still in the process where, I get to get tested in this process, and if I pass the test, I will become a practitioner, but that is TBD, to be determined. But just to give a little shout out to, I just wanted to go ahead and show people that there are biogeometry classes in education that go much deeper than I will go tonight. And these are the actual classes. So if you want to take a photo of that or just get an idea of how they really lay the groundwork for you to understand it more, this is that. Just wanted to give a nice plug to them. And even just a little background about me. I am a Czech practitioner, so I'm a corrective holistic exercise kinesiologist. I've been trained doing that and working with people, and I work with a lot of different clients. Do all sorts of different things with movement and nutrition and biomechanics and mental, emotional stuff. But through that process, I've realized that you can create the most amazing program for any client. And if the environment is not something that you're looking at, you can just hit a wall that you can't fix until you observe that. And that is why I've also become fascinated with building biology, and we have an amazing building biologist in the audience that I've learned a lot from. And yeah, through that process, biogeometry just took my life by storm. Also just having a long time background in music, over 20 years of playing music, a lot of the understanding of vibration and even a lot of the Pythagorean work that Ibrahim is inspired by is something that has really hit home for me, because we can actually apply that tactically, as you'll see when I get into this. But really just wanted to start with the history as well. I also want to invite y'all to ask questions throughout the presentation. Last time I just went straight through it and it was fun, but I would love for y'all to interact with me, ask questions, get clarity, because this is really a student sharing what I think is valuable. And also, we're gonna do a little clearing practice. So if y'all will stand up real quick, we're just gonna do a little shaking. So just a little like qigong kind of little shake. Yep. Just get it, moving, grooving. Take some nice deep breaths. And then now we're going to do actually using sound. It's a classic clearing practice. I just call it the Yahoo, but you just go Yahoo! So we're going to do that together. So 1, 2, 3. Yahoo! Let's do it a couple more times. Yahoo! One more time. Yahoo! Okay, let's clap 3 times. All right, together, one more time. That was better. One more time. Okay, all right, y'all can sit down.
Since you allowed us to have interaction,
Yes.
can maybe explain some of the benefits of what we just did as a clearing practice?
Yeah. So what's cool is actually I will be getting into the subtle energy sciences and really what built the groundwork for that, but there's subtle energy qualities that build up throughout the day, and they're connected to time cycles as well as our own vibrations that are going on throughout the day when we sleep and wake, and even parts of our subconscious. But what is called vertical negative green, which y'all should just get familiar with that term. It's a slightly confusing term, but I'll be explaining that more. But that subtle vibration is actually connected to a lot of the detrimental thought patterns, disease processes, chemical things in the air, earth grid radiation, all of these different functions that are part of the natural recycling process of the earth, but they also get accumulated in our body throughout the day when we're around a lot of electrosmog, a lot of different things in our environment. And so there's other clearing practices, using water, like doing a bath or a shower with Epsom salt. Salt is very clearing. But with that, you're actually just using sound and, using even breath, and just this kind of motion is in some ways tracing the torus field of your energy body. So it's allowing you to just kind of shake it all off. Some people will even, we're taught to even wipe the back of your neck, because there's a lot of that accumulation that happens in the lower part of our spine, as well as the upper cervical. And that's actually why a lot of people get headaches. It's connected to people getting a lot of headaches and dysfunction. So, yeah.
So you didn't just make that up then?
No, yeah. There's actually, what's cool is actually in class they explain a lot of how there's these different things that a lot of people just do because of happenstance, or it's like a shell of what we left behind. But it's actually, there are energetic sciences behind why we do certain things. People taking Epsom salt baths when they're feeling all over the place is not for no reason. There's actually a lot of benefit for that outside of just the magnesium and all the physical electromagnetic activity of that. It's actually also a subtle energy kind of clearing. Okay, so really, just to start out, Earth as a living energy system. So the Earth is structured by energy grids, zones, underground water crossings, and these really do create a lot of amplification, sometimes very beneficial, sometimes stressful. But what is fascinating about our work, even as we learn through the classes in biogeometry, is that actually we're interfacing with our environment all the time. In many ways, even a building that we're in is like the third boundary, or it's the third skin of what we're experiencing. We have our own boundary of our own body, but there is so much fascinating work showing that actually all of the vortices on the Earth that we call sacred power spots are actually also resonating and connected with our own bodies. And many times our body is a container for life force. It's a perfect container to actually be able to be imbued with that living life force that ends up slowing down and becoming more of what we call the electromagnetic spectrum. But above that, the vital and the mental emotional, those realms are actually connected to what Nikola Tesla calls scalar wave. When it starts to be imbued and actually connect through these vortices, not only Earth, but also our own bodies, they actually slow down enough for us to be able to interact with. But I just find that so fascinating that a lot of the time when we're working even in a building and doing practices for the biogeometry work, sometimes we'll find that if you harmonize a certain area in the actual building, it will harmonize someone's stomach meridian. But then also vice versa, if I harmonize someone's stomach meridian, that area of the building will actually start to be harmonized. It's mind-boggling for me because I'm just like, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. But as we get to go down the rabbit hole and actually experience these things, it's pretty fascinating. And I'll explain more of how that actually works. But yeah, just to know that we are a multidimensional organism that is living in the Earth, and we are part of a living organism that is the Earth, and there's so many different functions that are related to that. And I really believe that the ancient cultures really understood that on a deep level that allowed us to actually build with the proper materials, put it on the right place on the land to be able to be imbued with life force all the time. Where now we just intellectually do a lot of things that are, seemingly brilliant, but at the expense of life force in our own body, which is so fascinating to me. But I digress, and really just wanted to start with one of the most, I believe, advanced civilizations that lived on the planet. And the ancient Egyptian science is really fascinating because without their understanding and really what they left behind, I feel like we would still be searching for a lot of these things unconsciously. And they really, like I was just saying, they built a lot of their structures not only with certain materials, and really, I would say the original knowledge of architecture started with all of these different types of ancient civilizations, because they quarried certain stones and certain materials and made sure that they were put in certain directions and certain places on the Earth that I'll get into more of the nitty-gritty of what they were doing to actually design that. But you'll see here, I want to draw your attention, this is actually the Egyptian Waj pendulum. In certain museums, Egyptologists call it a ritual object, but it is actually a very interesting tool that a lot of the French researchers called the Egyptian pendulum. And at this top here, there's actually a hemispherical cap that creates a certain penetrating carrier wave that actually goes through the tip. And this tip even has a certain design principle that actually cancels out some of the harmful effects of that penetrating carrier wave. And that's just to show you once again that the Egyptians were not creating just these abstract symbols to represent some type of language. They were using this subtle vibrational quality to actually understand their known reality. And also Schwaller de Lubitz, he was what Ibrahim Karim refers to as one of the most astute researchers on a lot of the ancient Egyptian knowledge of how they built a lot of their temples in the design principles of using this background vibrational net that is part of the original, I would say, the etheric coming into the physical to create the human body, but they also use that to design the temples and different things. And this actually shows, some Egyptologists call this an artist grid, but I'll discuss maybe a little bit of it in the fact that this grid is a certain vibrational grid that is connected to the number 19, and 19 is a very sacred number in certain religions like Islam. But that number quality is what they use in a lot of their building principles to be able to actually have this type of spiritual resonance so that this type of life force could be in resonance with that, especially when they're putting it on the right spot on the earth. Yeah, and so moving on, similar principle of what I was just talking about with the shape-caused waves. So also just this idea that, for instance, the Ankh is not just something that represents eternal life. It actually was used for certain vibrational reasons. And right here as well, this is what they refer to as the netters. So you'll see different people with a human body but an animal head, and this is not because they worshipped animals. This is actually because they understood that the netters, which ended up actually being the inspiration for the name nature in the English language, is a connection to this type of right brain perception, or the animal perception was very connected to the original nature idea concept that there's forces beyond our own human brain that actually help instruct us on how to build and how to create our known reality. And Robert Gilbert really uses some brilliant ideas just around this idea that a lot of these, really until the last 200 years, we were always considering life force as part of our buildings, but also our products. And a lot of these different systems, you'll see everything from Ayurveda to Chinese medicine, they're taking this 0 point, or the center, this kind of oneness that creates all things, and then dividing it into different polarity scales to then be able to understand what the vibrational characteristics of each of those polarity scales is. And they were also using that in Egypt, and there's just mounds and mounds of evidence, especially when you learn how to actually understand and use some of these tools that we've been given in biogeometry to be able to actually measure and detect and determine what is happening in these functions of these different energetic tools that they were using. So it's just absolutely fascinating. Also, so Ibrahim really dives deep on this idea between the left and right brain perception, and talks a lot about how a lot of ancient man, there's actually a lot of Carl Jung's work as well as William James really looked at the development of the brain through primitive man to ancient man and then to more modern man, and was looking at these ideas of how primitive man was much more connected to their right brain perception. So they were much more in touch with this holistic perception, the same way that a bee is connected to the hive and actually does everything in mind with the entire society in mind. And this idea too is that primitive man really didn't necessarily have these ideas of, you know what, I'm just actually going to go over here and do my own thing. You know, you guys are cool, but you know, this is better. None of that was actually a part of it. It was really a concerted effort of this right brain perception, But then as they started to evolve, this doorway opens between the left and right brain, and their ability to then, I also put some different adjectives to describe. This is, of course, a caricature. It's much deeper than just a split between the left and right brain hemisphere. But this idea of logical thinking and quantitative and being able to actually split things and have this idea of linearity to then be able to have this balance between the left and right brain hemispheres so that they can then imbue all of this holistic perception into an actual building and be able to put it into work. Because that's really what I invite y'all to even think about. I truly believe we are getting to this time period where we're actually going back over to the right brain because we've become so left brain dominant to where we're just very much in that materialistic mindset. And this idea that really we're being called to be able to integrate the scientific and the spiritual. And it's actually not just these two completely separate things. Yeah?
So I'm trying to correlate what I've
Yes.
learned in the past about left brain, right
Yes.
brain people, right? So historically I've always learned that left brain people are more, it controls your right hand, right? So that means you're more, I guess, logical, and right brain is left hand or left side of your body, and that's
Yeah.
more creative, artistic,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Is that the one?
That correlates perfectly with this, yeah, because it's like this, and a lot of even my own work, like that I develop as a holistic health practitioner, I have this system called the EAR system, and it's all about this idea of when we imbue ourselves with artistic function and actually dive into arts, no matter what level we're at, we're able to actually access a lot of health benefits from this idea of being in the right brain center, because that holistic perception automatically turns on as soon as we're drawing squiggly lines on a piece of paper. And there's something fantastic about that, especially for people that are very stuck in that regimented, I must do this at this time, and and it's always a balance, of course. You can't be so right brain that you forget that time exists. But it is fascinating because even this idea of timelessness, where when we're actually doing the things that we love, if you notice, sometimes 2 or 3 hours will go by like that. And it's just amazing to me how if I'm playing guitar or doing anything in that artistic way, it does bring me into that right brain perception. So I believe that there is some type of calling that we're all being called to integrate those two functions of the brain, because I think so many people are attached to the facts and the science, and of course me too, but when it comes to especially the way that science is manipulated today to be able to prove certain things, to be able to then keep everything separate, it becomes very interesting because everyone's now a specialist, but no one understands the whole system. Yes?
Left primitive, what would be the opposite of that?
The contemporary man. Yeah, so like modern day man.
No right side, left side.
Well, they have you can see the doorway is opening. That's at least what Ibrahim talks about, this idea that the right brain, there's now a doorway that's opening, that we're being called to that. That's why so many people are so fascinated with things like ancient Egypt and the Sumerians and Atlantis and all these different concepts, that there are something beyond just this linear world that we are connected to.
What if it was closed, just left side?
If it was, you're saying if it was just left side? Yeah, I mean, that's what he kind of calls modern man, where we're kind of coming from, where we're just very much in that scientific materialism, almost Ahrimanic, if you were to talk about Rudolf Steiner's type of understanding. Does that make sense?
So that's still a bit open for a modern man?
Yes, yeah.
It's like fully closed.
No, it's not fully closed. Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah, it's like it originally was right brain, and then it gets to this nice balance that was around the time they tracked that's around the time of the height of ancient Egypt and different indigenous cultures around the world. And then as we've progressed, it's brilliant because we've now come up with these amazing technologies. I mean, you go to a hospital when you're in a horrible wreck, and it's amazing. They can put you together. So there's obviously value in it. But now it's just that process of being able to still holistically perceive this type of understanding for people with chronic stress or chronic fatigue or all these chronic health problems. And so related to that type of stuff as well.
It can be fully closed on the right side.
No, I mean, the only time that it's ever severed, I've heard, is from epileptic patients, that they actually surgically sever their left and right brain. And that really leads to just the ancient and medieval radiesthesia. And I wanted to just touch on this a little bit because as a lot of these sciences progressed, unfortunately, it left behind a lot of really just the shell of the understanding, kind of what I was talking about earlier with the energy clearing practices. The same with things like voodoo and all of these different things were actually part of a much deeper system that actually was related to all of these understandings. You can see people are using a Y rod to douse for water, and even things like alchemy and herbal medicine and law of similarities, which is related to things like homeopathics. But as I was saying, the cons are really just that because it was highly secret knowledge, you were really only introduced to a lot of this knowledge if you were an initiate and learning how to interact with those netters and the life force. And because of that, it becomes very dangerous because people have a fragmented type of understanding of these systems. But of course, the pros are that there's a lot of knowledge that survived is still here today, and that is why people like Ibrahim Karim are developing these things like biogeometry to be able to take it further. You had a question? Oh, no. Okay. And that leads me to just a subtle review of what biogeometry is, because I know some of y'all were here last time, but the way I like to describe it is that it is using nature's design language to activate the central harmonic of a shape to then create this type of centering, harmonizing effect in the room. So using different quality scales like shape, color, angle, number, sound, motion to access and create this centering effect. So when we're actually activating the center of, say, a circle, all of the parts of the circle around it in polarity will naturally exist in a much stronger way, is one way to put it. The other way to put it is that it really is the science of creating sacred power spots or creating the energetic quality of a sacred power spot anywhere. So the same way that I'm going to get into the history of what created sacred power spots and how we discovered them, now Ibrahim Karim has put in place a vibrational science that allows us to access the energetic qualities of a sacred power spot anywhere. So we don't have to just choose this one piece of land to put the perfect building, but we can actually now resonate with that quality because those central qualities around the world are similar to the chakras in the human body. They're not really ours, which is crazy to say. Like we don't, of course, own any parts of the earth like that, but we also don't even really own our chakras. They're actually constantly interfacing with connection and life force. So I also just wanted to point out some of the beautiful, this is some of Ibrahim's own work and design, because he's also an architect and engineer and has put a lot of work into his architecture. Some beautiful vaulted ceilings, and this is just one of his drawings. These are some of the tools that we use. This is actually my setup for when I was working on someone as a holistic health practitioner. I use a lot of the biogeometry stuff on actual people. And it's amazing because, once again, we're not using that yin or yang. We're not using polarity. We're actually activating the energetic blueprint that is innate to each human being. So when I'm looking at someone, I'm able to find an imbalance in their body. But then when I am centering it or using these different tools like the human archetype ruler, I'm actually able to find a certain spot that is connected to, maybe there's a weakness in the organ, and then I can find that it's weakened on a certain mental plane, and then I can actually not only correct that, but reignite it with its natural blueprint that exists from the time that we're born. So it's really fascinating. It's like been mind-blowing in my own life, so that's part of why I love sharing it. And this is also just to show this diagram that I had last time, but just this idea, once again, we're not balancing in the way of yin or yang or adding just the right amount of weight to balance it. Instead, we're going straight to the center, activating the center so that it naturally exists in its resonant harmonic. And it's amazing because it's restoring coherence, it's working with the biological intelligence, and it takes a lot of the danger out of it. As you'll see, I'll show some of the older work that Ibrahim built upon, and that's in many ways could be dangerous if you're not understanding it on a very holistic perspective. And biogeometry does not treat symptoms. It is an environmental balancing type of science. So it's really interesting in that way because time and time again they really emphasize that it's not a treatment of any kind. It's not even considered an alternative treatment. It is actually an environmental balancing. And once again, this idea of quantity and quality, they're both two sides of the same coin. They're very important. But if you were to put a white light through a prism, it would create certain specific angles that are also related to certain qualities that we experience throughout our day-to-day life. And it just goes to show you that once again, this quality aspect is still numerical, but the quality when we're seeing something or experiencing beauty or love, we're not thinking about this type of quantitative aspect of it. Yet that is also a part that we can measure and look at. And it's also to be shown that, for instance, certain numbers, if they're put in a specific shape, will then have a different energetic quality as well. We also talk a lot about, like I mentioned, the number 19, but also things like number 7, number 16. These have a certain vibrational quality beyond their quantitative aspect. So if you put the same shape, like these are all the same exact stars, so if you put them in a recognizable group, it actually has a very specific vibrational quality that we can measure. So it's really interesting in that way. And that really leads into the science behind sacred power spots. So why sacred power spots matter. Really, as I like to say, power spots, as we started to discover them and understand that there was, especially by looking at, like ancient man was probably observing a lot of these different animal activities. For instance, birds that are flying in a V formation, like a pigeon, for instance, if they're flying in this V formation, stop their V formation and create a little circle around an area of the earth and then go back into their V formation. And that's one way to recognize that there is a spot on the earth that has a certain significance. But it's similar in that way that you can really pay attention to the vitality of water quality as well as what animal is maybe healing in that place on the earth and different things that are giving us clues to be able to find these sacred power spots. But Ibrahim Karim actually was able to reverse engineer and understand that there are 3 qualities that are actually objectively measurable in a sacred power spot. And without going off on a tangent on that, those are horizontal negative green. Can you all say horizontal negative green?
Horizontal negative green.
The vibration or higher harmonic of gold.
Vibration or higher harmonic of gold.
And the higher harmonic of ultraviolet. So those 3 qualities have a lot of lore and interesting science and fascination behind it. But even this idea of the gold being this alchemical thing that all the alchemists were creating lead into gold actually represents very much the same quality of the centering effect or this natural resonant center that we're connected to beyond space and time. And we're also connected to that in our human body. And I will go into it as I get into the slides, but things like Egypt, they were designed in a certain specific way, especially the Giza Plateau, where these pyramids were put on very specific locations that were extremely resonant sacred power spots, and then connected all of the different pyramids through the ley lines of that specific power spot. So there's really a lot of interesting things about that, as well as this idea that certain angles of underground water crossing actually create this type of vortex. Like anytime anything really crosses in general, 2 things cross, they create this type of vortex. You may have seen it, leaves outside when wind is happening or things like that, but there's a certain vortex that happens when certain water crossings are happening with this relationship as well to the earth grids on that location. And that is part of what makes that actual energetic configuration, because also, a lot of the cities were actually built around sacred power spots. So we talk a lot about how all of the original town planning was built around putting certain buildings on sacred power spots and then using the ley lines as the main roads and building the entire society around that, because that actually imbued them with that good quality life force and energy.
What are the sacred power spots in Austin?
Someone asked that last time. That's a great question. I would love to go explore that, honestly. I feel like Barton Springs definitely has some type of quality to it, for sure. Someone else was saying some type of rock formation.
The enchanted
Enchanted Rock, yeah.
It's also, like people go there for spiritual, like energetic enlightenment. They feel like that. Oh, I, was able to meditate and get into trance so quickly. So it's theory that that's also a power spot.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's what's interesting too, is a lot of people talk about this as an area of illumination. So it's like they were following the animals, they were noticing that certain animals were healing, so then they would bring their people that were sick to this location, and they would notice those people were getting better, and so they would realize as they kept going there, they would also have these connections to etheric light beings or angels or these type of higher beings. So they started to build or put a certain rock on there to actually mark it. But also, as I'm about to get into, those rocks were not only there to mark it, but actually to amplify that energy quality throughout the entire space. And I already basically mentioned this. This is just to show a nice visual. A little fun fact is, as they progressed and lost that ability to really be able to sense it, they were using animals like sheep or camels to see where they would sleep at night and then use that as an indication of where to put their building, because, for instance, sheep don't actually ever really want to lay on an area of harmful geopathic stress, to put it very simply. So yeah, that's exactly what I was just talking about, this idea of the menhir. So they were putting these menhirs on the beneficial sites, and they actually were able to quarry these stones sometimes from 300 to 500 kilometers away and bring them to these locations because they had a specific high quartz content that they noticed actually amplified that quality. And Ibrahim talks a lot about how that's also part of the material knowledge that led to architecture, because architecture is a lot about material knowledge and understanding polarity and angle and all these different factors that they were already in touch with. So once again, I feel like a lot of these societies were very advanced, even though they weren't necessarily using advanced mathematics. They were able to observe and see what was actually affecting the environment and then build upon that. But the fact that they were able to get these giant stones, these megalithic stones, to these locations to amplify them shows that there is definitely some importance to that. And I love this little diagram that Ibrahim has of just the underground water crossings and seeing this kind of vortex so that you actually get a visual of what that looks like. Yep.
Now I'm curious. So you've got a property.
Yeah.
It's kind of large. You've got a nice backyard or whatnot. Could you theoretically take something like, I guess, is that a marker or amplifier or something like that?
It's a marker and an amplifier, yeah.
Could it be actually used as a...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that's what basically Ibrahim was able to synthesize a lot of this knowledge into a way where we can use a scepter, like an earth scepter, and put it in the exact right location, and it'll amplify that power spot energy in the entire property or a garden or whatever. Yeah, something, it looks like that actually, yeah.
Similar to this without space.
But it's nice that it can be small. You don't have to, I mean, you could have a giant statue if you want. That'd be sick. It'd be really cool. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And that leads me to really what they show is that then you see these formations start to get bigger with relationship to certain areas in the sky. And it really shows their knowledge of not only material and putting things in the right location, but really that they also were connecting it in a three-dimensional pattern. So they were also looking at the stars in the sky and connecting it in a certain formation that created this certain energetic quality. And the more modern aspect of this would be something like an obelisk that you'll see in certain areas, the Egyptian obelisk. But then they were able to put certain types of geometric information that were more complex than just your natural stone, which is also creates a certain type of carrier wave as well. And this is some of the more Middle Eastern style, but that also gives a certain energetic quality based on the certain shape information that's in those. And that leads us to then the evolution throughout time was the dolmen. So this idea of the sacred gateway, the Holy of Holies, where on the same type of crossing, if you put two uprights with a stone across, also giant, super heavy, like 20 to 30 tons, if you orient it the right direction, it creates a very strong quality of what we call the BG3, or that centering quality. And it carries it for a long distance. And a lot of the time it's connected to that cycle of time because it's connected to the east-west horizon. And so that really lays the foundation for what later then became these mounds that were artificial, where they would actually start to pack mud around these dolmens. And eventually, for instance, Saqqara Pyramid originally started as this type of holy gateway, and then they put a mound over it. And then over time, they put stones and different types of things that created a pyramid out of it. But it just goes to show you that when you're looking at a pyramid, for instance, it might be the last stage of maybe 10,000 years of societies building on that. Because if you go under it, like last time I discussed, I'll answer your question in just a second, but if you go 10 meters under a pyramid, you'll find another ancient civilization's monument, and then you go another 10 meters and you'll find another ancient civilization's monument, because there was a very specific energetic quality to that area. Yes? Stonehenge, yeah. Stonehenge has a very strong concentration of BG3. But yeah, it's just incredible, because a lot of people are so fascinated with how was it built, when was it built, which is very fascinating, of course. But this idea that there is a very specific location that many different societies were building upon that eventually created what you're seeing today, I find really interesting, because, yeah, as I said, a lot of people are really looking at the technicalities of it, which is also extremely fascinating, don't get me wrong. But that leads us to super advanced type of power spots like the Giza Plateau, where not only were they built on these grid lines in a perfect order, amplifying an extremely high amount of BG3. Like the way that they explain it to us is we can find BG3 or little mini sacred power spots all over the earth. But this is, I would say, a power spot that stands out amongst many across the world, but one of the most powerful in that capacity. That's why I truly believe that when people go there and they have these mystical experiences or even these miracle healings, it's because there's such a deep concentration of that BG3 that it's allowing them to actually fall into natural energetic resonance and their blueprint with their body and their soul and mind and all the aspects of themselves. And once again, these chambers were connected to certain areas in the sky. So not just a star. A lot of Egyptologists talk about how they're connected to a certain star, but we are shown in class that when you look at a certain area in the sky, there might only be a star nearby like Sirius, but that area could just be blackness. But if you measure it on one of our rulers or using a pendulum, there's a very strong concentration of BG3. So they were able to not only connect the pyramids on these BG3 ley lines, but they were also able to connect the chambers to specific angles that were actually connected to these areas in the sky. So it was not only imbuing it from the earth, but connecting it to the heavens. So it's just absolutely mind-boggling. Yes?
From our own work.
Yes.
Could we create like a triangulated from like here, some of the houses we've done
Yeah.
in West Austin, or like maybe find something like one of our houses down in South Austin? Like, do you think that we could create like power spot in Austin from these different locations connecting into, like, to help, especially for here, right? Like to
Yeah.
elevate.
I think so, but like you're making me think of the Hirschberg project, where he found that central location and put the shapes in the ground, and it created a 10-kilometer radius of BG3 that harmonized the whole town. I mean, yes, but I don't know. I can't say I'm at that level yet. I look forward to being at that level, but you know, yeah. And once again, it gets into these different cultures. As you see, they never really built their buildings on any random location. Today, we'll just put any building anywhere. That's perfect, okay, that's convenient, that's a great cost. That's what most people are thinking about. And all of these different civilizations, because a lot of what the Egyptian knowledge really did for people is it laid the framework that then led into the Jewish Kabbalah, and then got into places of Greece and Pythagoras, and then that went into places of Rome, and really was part of the dominant religion of the Catholic Church. And a lot of these different augurs were actually using divination of different areas of the land. And that led to what I'll get into, but the French researchers in the 1930s that were in microvibrational physics, and that also led to things like geobiology and building biology. And it's just mind-blowing because, once again, they really had this all set up so that we were connected in the grid of Earth so that we could have that life force wherever we're sleeping, wherever we're spending all of our time. And now we're being radiated not only with electromagnetic frequencies and toxic Earth energies, but we've put so much chemical pollution and so much toxic, even mental, emotional pollution in the air that it's creating such a detrimental effect that I truly believe it's up to us as a humanity, and it's really almost our duty to bring back the ancient knowledge, because it's something that, even though we may have not done it directly, our ancestors did, and so it's time to bring back that bridge through things like biogeometry. But the Greece and Roman planning is really interesting because I'm trying to remember, I think this is, I want to say in Switzerland, I forget where this is, but just shows you that all the specific buildings are on the main power spots and then everything is planned around that. Also, this is a great diagram where it shows that the church, for instance, the actual most important part where the altar is exactly on the strongest concentration of the BG3. And so a lot of these churches were built with that in mind, where when you were actually in a church, you would be in that field of BG3 and having this type of connection to God or source or the universe, whatever you want to call it. It was something that was actually imbued in the church and not just this type of shell of what is now left behind, because like I was just talking about, a lot of people will just put a church anywhere now rather than actually divinating where it's supposed to be, and let alone the materials that it's built with and things like that. This is also another example of the Sultan Hassan Mosque. This is a fascinating architecture because a lot of people have many ideas of why they built this type of 45-degree angle design. And what they show us in class is that actually they were following a certain type of earth energy line called the Hartmann. And then for this type of area of the building, then they followed the other line, which is called the Curry. And the Curry line actually is at a 45-degree angle. I'll show you a diagram later that shows you a visual of that, because I'm a very visual person. I like to have as many visuals as possible. And that really leads us to this idea of radiesthesia. In the early 1900s, a lot of scientific researchers were looking at these subtle energetic vibrations, especially from all the Egyptian work and all of these different ancient cultures, and trying to figure out how to put it into an understanding. And they were able to really create what was considered a type of microvibrational physics in the 1930s. And some of these researchers were absolutely mind-blowing in the way that they were able to access certain shape qualities, certain subtle vibrations from all of these different qualitative aspects. And one of the first that really is noted as being a huge inspiration for a lot of the researchers that built upon his work is Abbé Mermet, fascinating gentleman that is a Catholic French priest that understood a lot of these ancient civilizations and really studied them, and was able to use a lot of his tools and resources to be able to locate water, missing people, archaeological sites, and he was actually consulting for the Vatican and the government. And he's really the person that set up this idea of using a pendulum or physical dowsing in a way that we're not mentally asking a question. We're actually using certain series points, just the same way that a Pythagorean monochord has certain, anything that's double or half the length of the string resonates with that. The same can work with a pendulum. So the pendulum is an amazing device in the way that if you're using it for physical dowsing, the way that someone like Abbé Mermet was using it, you can find certain people. I mean, you have to be, of course, at a very high level because there's the possibility of autosuggestion and confirmation bias, but you're able to find a missing person by actually using the vibration of their personal wavelength connected to that pendulum. And he would use a map and be able to find someone very accurately, time and time again. And there's a huge volume of research that he left behind that actually is what really inspired the work of Louis Turin. And Louis Turin is also a fascinating gentleman because he was a French radio wave engineer, so he was fascinated with the idea of these subtle vibrations that we can't detect unless we have a device to be able to measure it. So for instance, radio waves, no one knows that they're there unless you have a radio to pick it up. And so he understood that, and looking at Abel Mermet's work, he was able to then find ways to use pendulums, but he started to design his own to see that there was actually not only certain subtle vibrations that were measurable in certain color scales. He ended up putting it in a color scale, which I'm going to go in a little bit into what that really means, because it's not necessarily just the visible light color, but he was able to create pendulums that were able to measure the vertical and horizontal propagating waves that were coming from certain subtle vibrations. So for instance, there were certain shapes, or maybe there was a certain poison or something that has certain vibrational qualities that are coming from it. And for instance, vertical waves are very disruptive to a lot of life on this known planet, where horizontal, I like to remember vertical, it's like the life and death. It's going up and down. It's like the type of wave that brings us back to spirit, or from spirit down to matter, where the horizontal, to stay on this three-dimensional plane, we have the horizontal waves, because the horizontal waves are much more beneficial. Not all vertical waves are necessarily harmful, but they are the ones that are associated with death and dying and poisons and things like that. But he was able to categorize everything into a color band spectrum, like a type of spectral analysis. So the same way that Mendeleev was able to create the periodic table of elements and actually categorize everything in a certain capacity, they figured that instead of referring to everything as a certain geometrical shape or an angle or a smell or a taste, it was much easier to refer to everything as a color band, but not just in the visible light spectrum. So if you imagine, just the same way on a piano there's octaves, you can go from a certain octave and then play the same note on a higher string that's double its length. It's the same way with a color vibration. So even though we're not seeing that color vibration, it exists, and we can measure it and categorize it and detect and determine what its function are.
Adam, you mentioned something.
Yes.
Kind of hit something with me. So it sounds as though there's ancient ways of picking up signals, depending on there's so many different signals that can pick up, different wavelengths, right?
Yeah.
And the modern age is like a transistor radio, right? You've got all these transistors that can pick up different frequencies.
Yeah.
The transistor rate is it's designed, whereas it sounds as though before it was like you're using different rocks and quartz and different materials to pick up the different signals, and they figured that out.
Absolutely.
So it seems like that's the kind of correlation that I'm kind of coming.
Well, absolutely. What's fascinating is we can actually use the pendulums that are detecting color qualities, and you can pick up a subtle vibrational quality that an electromagnetic frequency detector cannot pick up, but then you can also still use that color quality to pick up something that's in the electromagnetic spectrum. So for instance, something like vertical negative green that I discussed earlier. Say it again, vertical negative green. It's the most confusing term, but vertical negative green, for instance, comes from a lot of electromagnetic radiation. So we can pick that up from an electromagnetic radiation and even find it something that might be disturbing someone's sleep or something like that when we're measuring. But then also you can find something like a detrimental mental emotional thought pattern that might be considered in scientific terms at a scalar wave frequency, and we can still pick up that it's also that color band. And the one example that Robert Gilbert gives that I find fascinating is that the orange band, for instance, frankincense has a lot of the orange band. It doesn't appear orange, but it has a lot of that orange band, which orange is connected to the clearing type of quality. It's stimulating for the lungs. It's also clearing for the kidneys and adrenals. But there's a lot of use in the orange quality band, yet certain things that don't appear orange still have that band, if that makes sense. Does that register with y'all? And so, yeah, he really laid the groundwork for other researchers, because he discovered that there was 11 bands, but he didn't find this quality in between black and white that I keep referring to of negative green. And so that's where Chameray and André de Balazal come in. They were absolutely interesting researchers in the fact that they noticed that there was a certain penetrating carrier wave that was going through thicknesses of lead more than an X-ray could. And they were really trying to figure out, what is this band? What is this quality called? And when they used their pendulums and were finding what it was, they noticed it was on the opposite end of the green. So that is why they called it negative green. And that is why it is very confusing as a term. But they were able to actually understand that this opposite band of green, it doesn't really ever appear as a color. If it were to appear as a color, it would be gray. But it's very rare, from my understanding, that it appears as a color. But they were fascinated with this quality of energy because negative green, when it's horizontal, is actually very connected to our spiritual capacity. It's our ability to actually have all of our organs connect to the different parts of our life force. And it's a very important band to all mammals especially, but all beings on this earth. But the vertical band is much more associated with harm and death and disease processes. You can actually find vertical negative green in people that have active disease processes, which is interesting. Side fact. But they were still just trying to figure out what they could do with it, because the one thing that was the problem of detecting it is that they were using a circle to find all these color bands, and they noticed that the two best ways, because it needs to have some type of propagating energy to create this energy around a circle. So they noticed the sun was the best thing to use as something that would create that original source so that then they could detect all the other bands. But the thing that was frustrating is that the sun moves. Same with the magnetic. They noticed that north to south was one of the strongest type of carrier waves to be able to then look at the polarities of all these different things around the circle. So then they decided to cut the sphere in half and created this type of battery. So then they could actually completely have this type of hemispherical cap that would create this specific band vibration that, as you'll, once again, all of these vibrational qualities, once you have these tools and you can look around everything from the Himalayan traditions to ancient Chinese traditions, you can see that every one of these traditions, all of it makes sense on a subtle vibrational quality aspect, because a lot of them are using hemispheres to create certain carrier waves, or pyramids also create the same type of battery effect. But the ancient Egyptians, they knew how to cancel out the harmful effects. That's the thing that they knew that unfortunately Champmonnet did not know, and that led to an unfortunate death in his laboratory. And I find it a little comical that you get to see him and you see, once you understand that these create a very strong concentration of vertical negative green, which on a very simple basis means that it's just very dehydrating. It takes away the life force through water, and water is very connected to our life force. So it's vertical negative green is very dehydrating to our cells and our ability for our cells to turn over. And so, of course, when you have not only one hemisphere but multiple of them stacked, it makes that stronger, and then you make them bigger. Unfortunately, that's what led to his death, and he was found basically like mummified in his lab, dead. And
do you know what he died of?
it was really from this kind of dangerous vertical negative green. Yeah.
What did the coroner say?
Well, I don't know what the coroner said. I mean, I would love to look more into it, but from what I understand is that just it was a huge impact on the entire researchers community, and they really started to take heed in understanding that, once again, you have to understand dosage, safety, and practitioner regulation, because these things can be extremely detrimental. And part of what I love about Ibrahim's work is that he understood the danger of this, and so he created ways to actually interact with a lot of these energy qualities in a very safe way.
Are those little domes like copper or wood?
Wood. They're wood, yeah. Yeah, and what's cool is actually Robert Gilbert has an entire class that he still has up on his website that goes way deeper into this. I mean, I only know just brief parts of it because this is what we're taught in the history of how Ibrahim discovered biogeometry. Then as that progressed, a lot of the French research really, of course, had a lot of amazing value to it. But the Germans were very well known for being able to look at everything in a very clinical way, and were really specific about the way that they ran their scientific experiments. So they had the idea of creating a type of pendulum device that didn't have a human in it, because everyone has a big qualm with humans being involved in scientific projects. You know, it's like the age-old problem. But what was fascinating is that the pendulum didn't move at all. And then when they had someone that was energetically sensitive just touch their finger on it, because really what pendulums are is an antenna of us. We're the antenna, and then we're using a pendulum as an extension. As soon as the person just touched it without being able to move it, the pendulum started to react with whatever it was measuring. So it once again shows you that these pendulums are very amazing and very sensitive tools, but you just have to be able to use them in a way that you're practicing constantly so that you're not auto-suggesting and doing things to have confirmation bias, which is a big part of the standardization of science, but also even in the biogeometry work, they really emphasize that. And this is another topic in general, but I just thought it was important to mention that in that same time period, Gustav von Pohl, who was a German researcher, was looking into geopathic stress, and he found that actually in 10% of one town, Willisburg, 80% of the cancer cases were all in that one concentrated location, and he was fascinated with discovering why that is. And when he went and talked to the farmers, they discussed a lot of things that they had luckily kept their knowledge over time periods to be able to understand that there's certain places that you just don't put plants and animals because it's a very harmful type of geopathic stress there. And for instance, if they were to keep sheep in a cage in a certain location, and then once they slaughtered them, they would have tumors on their organs. And so they noticed that there was some type of dysfunction with these certain types of energy qualities that were coming from geopathic stress. And they go really deep into it in our classes, but I just wanted to show even this idea. These are where a lot of geopathic stress lines are crossing, and you can see this tree has this type of cancerous growth tumor. And this guy, Gustav von Pohl, really started to look more into cancer research and its association with geopathic stress zones. And so he was actually able to replicate the study, and it was recognized by the Berlin Center for Cancer Research, which I thought was really, really fascinating, because also, just so you have a visual, once again, these type of earth grids are like walls rising from the earth all over the earth. They're not necessarily harmful from the get-go. It's just that they piggyback on all the different vibrational qualities of vertical negative green that we've put in with our electromagnetic smog and chemical pollution and the mental emotional pollution that we have now. All of that rides in with a certain carrier wave like resonance, and actually creates these earth grids to be much more toxic and much more harmful to us because they're dehydrating us. They're full of a lot of vertical negative green. But it was fascinating because a lot of these different studies also showed that certain crossings in the bed were associated with certain ailments that people had. So, and there's tons of research showing all of the different functions around earth grids that I personally would like to study a lot more of. And it's funny because on Wikipedia it's considered a pseudoscience, go figure, but there's a lot of really interesting research if you actually want to go find it. I highly suggest it. This is a great little diagram too that just shows this idea that if this geopathic stress line is going through the bed, here's the dowser. You can also notice by certain areas in nature, if you see, for instance, a line of ant hills, ants resonate very strongly with vertical negative green, because also, even though they're harmful or more harmful today, they are part of the natural communication network of the earth. So ants know to go there to recycle that area of the earth and things like that. But you'll notice that, for instance, a certain hedge might start to be decayed and brown and actually not grow in that area, and that's also an indication that there's an earth grid going through that area. But also they saw on EEGs, they did a lot of research showing that actually your brain gets scrambled when you're on certain geopathic stress lines. So there's certain areas that a lot of car accidents will happen, and they've actually correlated it with certain areas that have a high level of geopathic stress. A lot of the German research is there, of course, very adamant about understanding a lot of these different things. And this also just shows you what they look like overlaid on each other. These are the Curry and the Hartman lines that we're trained to actually be able to dowse for in biogeometry. And this is just so you get a visual of just the lineage of research, just going from the ancient Egyptians, Pythagoras, going to radiesthesia and Abbé Mermet, and then going to things like German geobiology, which I touched upon. And that leads us also into the amazing world of biobiology, which is something that I'm in the process of eventually becoming an electromagnetic radiation specialist in building biology. But that is also why I've been having great conversations with George. He's an amazing wealth of knowledge. Highly suggest reaching out to him if you want to understand what type of materials you should be building with and why and the science behind it. Because there's an entire trove of incredible research just in that world. And they also were very well known for being able to use a lot of the inspiration from Vastu and things like feng shui, but being able to actually build with the right materials so that it would tamp down the toxicity of earth grids and things like that as well. And it's one of the only other sciences that actually really identifies electromagnetic radiation being something that is detrimental and something that we should pay attention to. And radiesthesia has somewhat survived, but that's part of what brought it back is biogeometry. And before we get into I'm going to do a little demonstration for y'all that I'm going to involve Lori so we can get up and, I know it's a lot of information, so I appreciate y'all's patience. But this story I really enjoy because really this is how I would say Ibrahim was able to come upon a lot of this knowledge. So Ibrahim Karim, as a young architect in his 20s, he was starting to work for the Egyptian Ministry of Architecture. And this man that was the director of the Ancient Egyptian Museum of Medicine, Sakakini Palace, asked the Ministry of Architecture if they could send their best architect to be able to do some renovations and different things to be able to really bring the museum back to life. And they were like, oh yeah, we got our most senior guy. He's the best guy we have. This will be your guy. And they're like, nope. That's not him. There's only one guy that can actually do this, and it's Ibrahim Karim. And they're like, what? Ibrahim Karim? Why? He's like our most junior guy. He doesn't have the experience that it takes to be able to do this. And he was like very adamant, this is the guy. This is the guy that we need to bring. And so he brought him on the project, and as they were doing the project, there was a lot of different energetic researchers in the Middle East that were looking at a lot of this old research in Egypt and the French research. He was actually introduced to this guy, Khalil Masih, and he was a Coptic Christian medical doctor that actually really knew the French work inside and out and started introducing Ibrahim to a lot of this work, and it was fascinating to him. So he was always talking about how he wanted to go to Paris to go to the original spot, I believe it's the Museum de Radiesthesia, and it just so happened that there was an architecture conference that they sent him to in Paris, and when he was there in Paris, he apparently also on the other side, it's fascinating, there was a woman that was actually told by a renowned psychic that there would be an Egyptian coming to receive all of the old stuff because a lot of their research was around Egyptian architecture. There would be an Egyptian that would actually be bringing back all of the ancient tools. And so she was waiting for him, and apparently he took longer. I guess he took 3 days when he was supposed to come on a certain day. And only he himself thought this. This is like, he didn't tell anyone when he was going to go. But he showed up and he was asking people in the museum, do you know anything about all of these radiesthesia instruments or anything like that? And they're like, oh yeah, no, people they do mental dowsing now. No one's really into that stuff. Sorry. And a woman overheard him speaking and was like, wait, you're the Egyptian. Where have you been? I've been waiting for you. And he's like so confused, like, what do you mean? Like, and she's like, you're the Egyptian. She's like, come down. And she brought him down to the basement. And basically she had an entire trove of all the original instruments, out of print books, because also she was the widow of a man that was friends with all the original French researchers. So she gave him this trunk, and he was asking, okay, well, what do I owe you? And she was just like, just keep this alive. You're the Egyptian. We studied all the Egyptian work. Now keep this alive and bring this back to Egypt. And so he calls it a treasure that one could not buy. And then he just started doing private research for about 10 years and really only told some of his close friends, but that was the beginnings of biogeometry. And so now our demonstration. So does anyone want to be a guinea pig for this?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Perfect. So just to give a little insight into how this works. So also in the 30s, certain medical doctors were actually trained in radiesthesia to be able to detect certain imbalances in organ systems and things like that. And then they were able to actually cross-reference some of their medicines and things like that. We're not going to do that today. This is definitely not a medical treatment of any sort, but we are going to find a certain imbalance. And I first want to just show the importance of directionality. And then I'll also just show you kind of through the biosignatures, we're going to just correct it. So it'll be a fun little experiment. Okay, so, and I'll kind of explain as I go, and feel free to ask as many questions you want. So I'm going to just have you just rub this across your face just to get some of your energetic quality, and then give me a little signature. Pretty much this is just what we call a personal witness or a vibrational witness. It just has their specific energetic fingerprint. Also can come from a photograph and different things, but this is what we use in a lot of the work. And then so what we're taught to do is I will take basically her personal wavelength, which is using, this is a neutral pendulum. It doesn't have any, anything other than resonance with different qualities of the different planes of nature. But based on the string length, it will actually be connected in resonance with her specific vibration. And so it'll start, once I get to the right string length, it'll actually start to turn clockwise. So I can do it on the piece of paper, but I'll do it to her. And it takes a lot of practice because there's no mental questions, and it's just really about focus and clear mind state awareness. Okay. And then I sometimes will just check on my own vibration, make sure I didn't get something connected to polarity or something like that. But what's cool, I love to even show this to kids, as soon as you get in their energetic bubble, and then actually you can even see like the level of the chakras. Gotta open up that vocal chakra. No, I'm just kidding. But then, so what I'm going to do, it'll be a little funky on the TV, but, oh yeah, can you set up that other Hamburger emitter? I put it right there, yeah. Because we actually have BioGeometry set up in the space here like all the time, so it's funny because actually put it there just so it cancels out for her. But it's funny because it's a funny problem to have, but we have actually enough BG3 in here that it corrects a lot of imbalances in people's body all the time anyways. So we actually have to use two very strong emitters of it to actually create like a cancellation effect so that I can actually show you what it does, because otherwise my experiment might just be like canceled out by the beneficial energy that's in here, which is a good thing, but it's a good problem to have. But then, I don't know if it's easier for y'all to see. Actually, I'll just point because I was going to use a, so you'll see like basically I connect to her personal wavelength and I'm now connected through this piece of paper. And then I'm just going to find an area of disturbance just with my focus, because all of these, as long as it's a drawn out anatomy chart, I can find through resonance some area. As soon as it gets, actually I'm going to probably not talk as much just because I need to focus, but as soon as I find an area of disturbance though, you'll see it either slow down.
Well, I can talk it through too if you'd like.
Yeah, you can talk through it, yeah.
Yeah, basically what he's doing is he's using the pendulum that is connected to her energy as a resonance. And as soon as he points at something, because he's connecting to both at the same time, on part of her organ system, as soon as he focuses on something that does have a disharmonious or it's not as in harmony, the pendulum will either go to a neutral state, it'll slow down in a clockwise direction, or it'll start to go counterclockwise. And so as soon as it decreases in energy or starts to go counterclockwise, that's when he knows that, oh, this area has a disturbance in her energy field. And it's really cool how he's just using his body as the antenna, and he's resonating at her energy quality. And the pendulum is what's allowing him to see this connection.
So I found like a little weakness in the, that's your right kidney? And then, so one of the things of the demonstration that I wanted to do, okay. So what I'm going to first have you do, before I do anything with biosignatures or anything like that, I'm going to first just have you directionally turn slowly and see if we can correct it through directionality. So first let me just, it's a little bit awkward. Let's see, actually if I put this here, this is going to be a better setup for me. Go to take your personal wavelength again. Once again, I'm just like very finitely going down the string until it starts to get to clockwise. Double check. Okay, it's still weird setup. Okay. And then right about here. Okay. Slowly turn clockwise.
Like your whole body?
Yeah, whole body, yep.
Angle like you're just turning.
Yeah, like you're...
Maybe slower?
Yeah, actually keep going. There you go. And that's just to show you all that directionality is very connected to a lot of things we do, and most systems never even discuss it.
Another fun one would be if we turn this on, like turn our harmony back on. And
Yeah, so wait, first just start turning back left slowly. Just to show you all. And then it starts to become weak again. Fascinating, right? Okay, yeah, maybe take the, I'm curious to see.
It just being in the space, now that it's completely harmonized.
It went to neutral. Take away maybe mine, I don't know if that's creating effect. No, it's still neutral.
So then the space harmony isn't...
It's at least making it better. Yeah.
You're making it going from disharmonious to neutral. Yeah.
But it's not strong.
But it's not. Yeah.
But start turning again. Turn right slowly.
Do you want to go down?
No, not yet. That's fine because obviously just that direction her body likes for her kidney. But that also goes to show you a lot of ancient principles, about like where your bed is placed and things like that are connected, to this idea of something that's either strengthening or weakening to you. But the beauty of what biogeometry has created is this ability to put a centering effect where, of course, I could make it to where it's actually specified to something in her body if she has a certain ailment that she's had for a long time or something like that. But also, just in general, it takes directionality out of the equation as much. So, for instance, people love the fact that if they design their whole house and have a very specific configuration to it, that I don't have to come in there and be like, we're going to have to move everything and turn the bed this way and do this. I can just put my shapes in the right locations and her bed will be much more strengthening. So yeah, we're going to continue this with a quick demonstration. I just want to make sure, is this still filming? Yeah, okay, cool. Sweet. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So then this is one of like many, many routes that we can take in the biogeometry work, but this is a very simple and easy one. What's interesting about the kinetic and vibrational connection of the body is that although I'm going to look and see if something in her kidneys will, like one of the kidney biosignatures, by the way, you can pass this around. This is what I'm going to use to actually correct. This is the biosignatures book. So it just shows, these are all three-dimensional blueprint type of energy shapes that are actually the way that energy moves through each organ. And each one of those patterns is actually three-dimensional, shrank down into a two-dimensional shape that Ibrahim did countless amounts of research for each shape. So it's really a huge benefit that he released to the public, because, I mean, even if you don't have the energetic ability to use a pendulum and find which one, some people can still intuitively be able to find which one their body needs. And I just with these, I've had the craziest type of reactions in my own body, and also because I don't think most of y'all weren't here, I believe, but basically part of what got me into biogeometry was these, because I lost hearing in my ear for 2 weeks, and I had someone that was trained in biogeometry, and it was like my last resort. I thought this was like, I was like, this is crazy, this is probably not going to do anything, and they found the exact one that I needed, put it on my skin, and the next morning I woke up and within 30 minutes my hearing came back, and it freaked me out. I didn't necessarily give all the credit to that because I was still a skeptic, but it really made me interested. Anyways, okay, so we're gonna go to the kidneys and see if that corrects it. But sometimes, as I was saying, like sometimes an area in the kidney might be imbalanced because there's something maybe going on with the heart or the lung. So that's what's fascinating. Sometimes you'll find that there is a certain alchemical combination of these different biosignatures, because once again, these are all innate energy patterns in everyone's body since they're born. So, okay, kidneys. Let's see. Okay, for this, I'm going to focus on this so I can keep looking. But this part of the kidney, because a lot of this is focus too, so that's the... But then I basically am just using my awareness to focus on that area with her personal wavelength, and then seeing if that will correct it. And it doesn't. So I think one of my quick ways, without taking too long, there's a couple biosignatures that are very powerful at the back that are they're more esoteric, but they're connected with human attributes of divine names. So just to be accurate, I'm going to connect to this again. Okay. Come on, you got a stubborn left kidney, or right kidney. Huh. Oh, at least went to neutral. Let's see if we can find another one. That seems to be pretty good. Double check it. Just get a regular personal wavelength. Connect to that part of the kidney, and then check that biosignature again. Nice. And that's just one example. There's a lot of other stuff, but this is the human attribute of potency from the divine names of the Sufi tradition. This one, like I said, is more esoteric, but these are so powerful that, I mean, I could probably spend a lot of time going through many biosignatures to see what would correct her kidney, and it would just be fun to experiment, but just for time's sake, these are very powerful, so I know that they'll correct some things that I just need to be corrected quickly. But this is, I mean, and I've sometimes looked these up because there's still, actually in that book that I'm passing around, there's a lot of really good information about these specific ones. But out of respect, Ibrahim only released 10 out of, I think, 99 divine names, because in the Arabic tradition, it's a very sacred thing to understand the meaning and use behind the 99 divine names. And that's also why he calls this the human attributes of divine names, because it would be not only too powerful, but just a little bit disrespectful to the tradition of the Sufi tradition. But yeah, so it's once again, I mean, they've only explained a little bit out of this, and this is near the end of my presentation, so.
Would you,
Yeah.
ask, so now that you found that,
Yeah.
If you were working with her as a client,
Yeah.
and maybe you weren't in person or you were, what would be your next steps in order to help solidify? Because like, there's more things
Right.
than just identifying it, so to actually help correct it.
Well, and so I usually will do, with a lot of my like holistic health clients, I will actually create certain, well, I won't create the emitter itself. We actually have those pre-designed, but there are certain emitters that we can actually, they're like a little mini power spot that we can put a personal witness on, and then we can connect it to that shape if I'm not in person, because I've done a lot of actually distance healing that is also, like, it's hard for my logical left brain part of me to even believe some of the things that's happened with some of my clients, but it's just, I've learned to accept it. But what's fascinating is that's one way, but there's also ways that I will actually use that to correct it, so that then that takes care of, point one. But then what's interesting that we also find as we're getting trained, for instance, in the last class in the applied skills workshop, we learned that there are actually specific, I would call them almost like trigger points in the body, but there's trigger points in spaces that certain crossings that are very much holding a lot of the momentum of the entire energetic blueprint. If you correct that one space, you will be able to actually correct all the other dysfunctions in the body, because just like, for instance, in the body, if someone has an issue with their teeth, they could be also doing all sorts of amazing things, having the best nutrition, all that stuff, but the teeth are so high up on the totem pole that if you don't get those corrected, you're going to still have problems. So it's the same kind of thing where I'll correct that, and then if I can find another thing that's uncorrected, that's giving me a clue that there's actually something up on a higher level that needs even more attention. And so I'll do that. Sometimes I am the energetic researcher that I will do that for a lot of my clients for like an hour to an hour and a half. And sometimes it's wild, because I'll correlate it also mentally, emotionally with all my background in holistic health and look at kind of what it's related to. But sometimes like I'll have a client come to me and they might be doing physical stuff with me too, but they might have something that is going on with, their kidneys or their liver or something. But then, like I was saying, I'll find there's some issue with the teeth, or there's some area in the thyroid or the heart that actually is much higher up on the totem pole. And once again, these aren't like medical diagnoses, but if I keep finding it, like I'll correct it still. That's the benefit, is I can still correct it energetically, and then hopefully that'll change the physical. But basically, if I keep finding it over and over when I'm doing these sessions, then I ask them to usually go see a medical provider and just look. Once again, it's like, I'm not by any means a medical doctor, I'm not diagnosing it, but it is interesting because sometimes I'll work with someone and I purposefully don't want people to tell me anything that's going on with their body, because I want to just find it and see what is going on. But I'll be like, okay, there's something going on with your left shoulder or something like that. Or, like one person I recently had a lot of stuff going on, and I did find something, I think, on the kidney, and they were about to go get a CAT scan, and they were like, oh yeah, that's weird, because we're not actually focused on the kidney, we're focusing on this other stuff, the lungs or whatever. But then they went and got a CAT scan, and they found like a little growth on their kidney. And I thought that was fascinating, And once again, I've worked with a lot of, now that I'm like in these spaces a lot with a lot of people, like I have a lot of people that are doing all sorts of bioenergetic scans and all sorts of scans of people's bodies, and we'll kind of cross-reference blind so that I can practice, and then we'll look, and a lot of the time it's like I'll have like 85 or 90% of what they have on their scan. So it's fascinating, but it's taken a lot of practice. Like I'm the weirdo that practices like an hour every day because I'm just obsessed. but yeah.
How do you actually correct it? Do you like...
Well, you have to put. Usually the most simple way is I have a little mini printer that I'll actually give to her at the end, but it's a little sticker that you can just put on your body, and it just needs to be in your energy field for about 24 hours. And your body naturally knows that energetic signature. So it'll naturally start to take heat. It's almost like plugging in like a little computer chip back into your body that you were missing, because it was just imbalanced by whatever is happening in your environment or your emotional, mental landscape.
And that's the shape of that.
Yeah, and actually what's cool is sometimes people that are a little artistic, I will actually assign them to draw that like 10 times a day, because there's a specific way to draw it. I can't actually, I mean, they teach you how to actually project it into someone's energy field. It's a little more esoteric. I like to do it, but I personally also just like to give people a sticker just because it's like a little bit more like, okay, that's definitely in your field. I didn't imagine that. So that I've gone down this rabbit hole because I wanted to get tattoos of it, but because those signatures, you have to have the right energetic quality of the BG3 in them. You have to draw those in one full swoop. That's the art of it. That's why it's also a fun meditation. But there's no tattoos out there and also the tattoo artist himself would have to be very like energetically clean and clear to be able to do that as well. So, I mean, if you can find me a BioGeometry tattoo artist, that'd be sick. I would love that. But I don't know if I'll have enough life force in this lifetime to do that. I mean, I already have like 20 side projects, but.
It did teach a little bit about it for us of like how to correct tattoos. So like I was measuring mine, because mine are like infinity symbols and the seed of life and like these different sacred geometry things. And they taught us to measure it. And so I actually, one on my ankle, I actually just drew like a little correction that's like what do they call it? The turning correction kind of thing?
Yeah, like a virtual rotation, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Because it wasn't in harmony, and as soon as I put just that little extra oomph on the side of the tattoo, it corrected it, and so it was in harmony. So it was really cool. So, but I was also, energetically clear. I'm doing it myself.
Yeah.
I could see where we could potentially harmonize the tattoo art, the shop, the
artist,
clear the art, and these kind of things, and then.
Well, and for instance, there's certain tattoo patterns, like I'm considering for the first time in 9 years getting a tattoo because I found an artist that I just really resonate with. But like vibrationally, I'm the guy that asks, okay, send me all your tattoo designs. I'm going to energetically test them. And they're cool with that, but it was just like funny. And I'm like, okay, that one tests well for me. So I might get that for my birthday because it's coming up in a couple weeks. But, but that just to be said, they're actually, I mean, that's a whole tangent in itself, but there is there's a slide they gave us in class that talks about the history of how certain tattoos were put on certain areas of the body there's people from the Ice Age or bodies from the Ice Age that are found where there was breaks in the bone that they found also tattoos on those areas, and they noticed that actually the vibrational qualities of certain geometric patterns in tattoos were originally used to help certain healing processes, almost like acupuncture meridians. So it's really interesting in that capacity. But just to close it out, I've probably already just covered a lot of this, but why biogeometry works, it really is the centering principle. It actually brings everything to its original unified source by activating that central principle. This is a beautiful diagram of him and Dr. Emoto. Dr. Kareem and Dr. Emoto are good friends, and they've done a lot of scientific research together, but some of the most consistent crystals actually come from the biogeometry cube that they put in the space. And so that's just a cool fun fact. I love that you can actually see how it structures the water. But also this idea, once again, of the qualitative versus the quantitative, they did a scientific experiment. There's a lot more to it. I just put this little diagram so I would remember. But pretty much they put a cell phone against someone's head, and usually when you put a cell phone against your head, it heats up your head, and there's a certain level of infrared. Well, when they put the biogeometry sticker versus the control, it didn't heat up nearly as much. It actually went down like a 1 degree Celsius. And then with the actual environmental quality balancing shapes in the space, as well as the cell phone shape, it went down even more. So once again, it's like the quantitative data, idea of the cell phone heat didn't change, but the person's temperature didn't heat up as much. So it's just showing that even though it didn't change the quantitative amount of EMF coming from the cell phone, it's still harmonizing the quality of it. Yeah.
So it wasn't as detrimental to the person.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And then even just, this is another thing that I highly suggest looking into. It's fascinating. It basically just shows they expose all these rats to different pollutants of certain bad building materials, and then with the biogeometry harmonization show that there's quite an effect on the rats and their ability to at least survive much more naturally than the control rats. And there's like a whole, it's actually a PubMed article, so I thought that was cool. This is just to kind of give you a visual idea of some of the tools. I already showed you some of them, but just actually Lori came and worked on this little project with me. I'm working on a friend's farm, and it's a big, big property, so it's been fun. And my friend has been gracious enough to let me like work on all the, because like I said, I'm in the process of becoming a practitioner, so all these tools that we now have access to are just so powerful, and there's so much practice, and there's so much learning how to get out of your own way and learn how to really be a good measurer to be able to detect and determine where the right place to put all these things are. But this is me actually determining where certain earth grids are so that I can put a specific disk that we have that harmonizes earth grids. This is a very interesting tool called the material balancing wheel that I don't have enough time to get super deep into, but basically using directionality and principles of angle, you can actually put a certain material of like say a carpet into this material balancing wheel, and it'll actually harmonize everything that was from that batch of that material. So it's almost like on that quantum physics level where it's like, and they use that in an entire project. There's a whole fascinating story that I wish I could get into. This is the earth scepter that I was talking about. Instead of having this giant menhir stone, you can just have this in the right spot, and it also, it was crazy. Me and Lori measured a lot of the property, and we got to one point where we turned all the tools off and we just had this, and it was harmonizing like most of the property just because it was put at the right place and the right angle. And it was like, me and her were like trying to find a spot. We were like, we must be making this up. Like there's no way that this is giving us this much BG3, but it just goes to show you with practice and dedication, you can really get some great results. And just closing it out, the future is not more control, it is better tuning. BioGeometry offers a language to speak with life again using form, proportion, and resonance.
And I want to clarify for,
yes.
So practitioner of this environmental home solutions, that's what we're training to be practitioners of, like harmonizing the space, harmonizing the land, but he's already trained in harmonizing bodies. Like,
yeah.
So
yeah, as a holistic health practitioner, I'm able to, work using that as part of my modalities to work on human bodies and help harmonize people's
harmonize the energetic
system. Yeah.
So it's just the spatial practitioner that he's still training to be. He is.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And then, these are just some of the tools. I also just love Robert Gilbert's quote on how biogeometry offers methods to directly detect, measure, create, and transmute specific qualities of energy so that you really know the effects you are creating with your energy work. So like any energy work that you do, these are amazing tools to just be able to see what you're doing and be able to measure and actually empirically understand, okay, I'm actually creating this effect. Because there's just so much energy work out there, and like a lot of the biogeometry world talks about it, and it can be really good energy work or it can be stuff that's just not doing anything. And so it's important for us to have our own sovereignty, our own power, to be able to also trust our intuition and be able to like really connect in that way. But yeah, these are some of the tools that are open to the public, and also you need to have these for the foundation class. But this is the BG16. This is like the main one that you use to measure the BG3. These are for the color qualities, the vertical and horizontal pendulums. And then this is the ICUP, which is the neutral pendulum that I was just using for the advanced course. And also just if you want to take a picture, if you're interested in having, like I have the medallion, this is a great tool to just have in daily life. It has a lot of science behind it. There's a whole science project I went in the last presentation about how it works. But basically it has a lot of the main biosignatures that were found in a lot of the scientific research. And these are just great tools to have on you daily because of the amount of electrosmog we're in, the amount of different people's energy that we're around. So I just enjoy having that. And even if you don't get that, I always tell people the L90 is just so powerful. It's so simple. It looks ridiculously simple, but when you learn the actual energetic blueprint behind how he designed this and the design principles, you really understand that with proportion and shape, you can have these very simple designs with very powerful results. This in itself really helps with on more of the mental emotional plane, but also helps with things like 5G and can help with electrostress. This is the home kit. Very much suggest having this as just like kind of the basic foundation for people that might want to just have some centering effect in their home. Of course, you can hire a practitioner. Eventually, me and Lori will be practitioners. You can hire us, and we can put even more powerful solutions. But this is just a great intro kit because it gives you an entire instruction manual on how to actually install it, or you can obviously ask one of us. Like, I love helping people install these because if you put this in the right space or the right place, it will be much more powerful than if you just put it on a random spot. And this is a charging tray. I always love recommending this. This is also very inexpensive. It's like $30, and you can charge water, certain minerals, crystals, whatever you want to put on it. But once again, an extremely simple design principle, but when you're able to measure it, it's very powerful, and it's just made out of plastic, but it's incredible. I've seen people make giant one of these for their beds and gardens, which is really cool. So their whole bed is full of BG3. This is the cell phone chip that I was just talking about the research where they showed that it was able to lower the actual temperature of how much someone's face was heating up. And these are the major sites that I get most of my stuff in America. And then once again, these are the classes if you're interested. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I also just wanted to do one offering, free energy audit for the first 5 people that sign up this week that are just interested in it and want to look into their energy system. If you go to energy.fallenfrequency.com, I will happily give you a little insight into what's going on with your system. Thank you. Yeah.